We are drafting. There's 4 of us here today on RotoViz Overtime. It's myself, Shawn, Siegele, Blair Andrews, and Kevin Szafraniec. We're drafting against the RotoViz OT listeners in a community draft. We all have our individual teams, so we'll be talking throughout the picks. But I believe, Shawn, you may be the first competitor up from our side, and we'll talk through the draft board. So me and Shawn still going strong in that first league that we set up here, the Guillotine League. We'll see if we get any conversation on that throughout today's show. But Shawn, you're up on the clock at the 103. Who are you adding to your roster here?
Well, we had Chase and Barkley go with the first 2 picks. And as Colm knows, I bid $704 today for Saquon Barkley in our original Guillotine League and to get him. So I now have Breece Hall, Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, and a number of other players. I don't have a ton of money left, but Colm, I'd been projected as the chop the last 2 weeks, and a final moment pickup of Darius
Slayton, baby,
carried me through. I didn't want that to be the case anymore. This was a week last week where there were a lot of elite players on the team who got chopped, and obviously in part that team was chopped because of the Barkley bye. My team now has a very good chance to run, not necessarily run the table, but get close to the end. And one of the things we talk a lot about is that your teams are going to, or your amount of free agent dough is going to look better as you go through, because teams are going to continue to get chopped. It's not just the teams go out and the players go in, but their fab money also disappears from the pool. Having said that, I took CeeDee Lamb. Blair, you were up next.
So, Shawn, we did have some technical issues with Blair. We're going to hopefully get him back in here. His microphone not, cooperating as we make the pick. So, Blair did take Amon-Ra St. Brown. Then it was Justin Jefferson, Jahmyr Gibbs. That came to my pick. I went with Malik Neighbors, which, as we're recording this one, still unclear as his status in week 6. So that could be a little bit of a tricky pick if you have to set him for this week. He's a player that I also have in that other league that we were talking about a moment ago. We have moved on through. I had the 7th pick, then it's AJ Brown, Kyron Williams. 10th pick, Kevin is up. Kevin, you mentioned you're not a big fan of how the 10th set up for you. What were some of the issues, and who did you make your selection be?
So I went with Marvin Harrison Jr., but I wasn't feeling great about it. I was hoping to get, maybe some wide receiver to fall to me. The other pick was Derrick Henry I was looking at as well, but I guess I just can't make that pick in the first round of any draft right now. And I mean, in his, it seems like when they're when they get up big, he's been getting fed, but then like when the Ravens are in shootouts, he has not been getting a ton of work and really got saved by that 50-yard run in OT. So I just don't think that he's as consistent maybe as I want, because he could just, fizzle out this week and I can get chopped in the first week. So
that's one of the things with this particular type of format is, it is week to week and you have to make sure you get through each week. But the way Derrick Henry has looked so far this season, and I do agree that he was bottled up a little bit in that game in week 5, but he has looked tremendous in the opportunities that he's been given, and it kind of wears down the teams, and then in those last kind of minutes of games can obviously break off those big runs like he did, almost getting into the end zone this past week. But I did pass up on Kyron Williams. I thought was interesting. You have Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson. There's some thoughts of picking those guys up, but I do know in an OT draft it's going to be a squeeze on the wide receivers. Just before you pick again, Kevin, Garrett Wilson goes, so you're back on the clock. Is there anyone standing out here that looks appealing to you?
I'm thinking Devonta Smith, just for the fact that he's already got through his bye. I don't have to worry about that. And I mean, he should be back this week, I'm assuming, after the concussion. So just go back to the old reliable, just load up on the wide receivers.
Yeah, that was somebody I was going to not mention until it got to my pick. I was hoping he would come. The bye weeks also, myself and Shawn did a resurrection draft on Underdog a few weeks back. We took a lot of week 5 players. So you obviously have passed that bye week now, which makes it very beneficial. If again, you have to make it through. That's another thing. You're going to have him for a week, but if you don't get through, also you're in big trouble. So I'm 1 pick away, and I'm going to have a couple of potential decision points here, but I do feel like I'm probably going to lean into the tight end position here and go with Brock Bowers, who, guys, in a non-tight end premium format, did you think that at this particular point, 6 weeks into the season, we'd be drafting Brock Bowers in round 2? Was that the thesis all along?
Yeah, I think so. Every other article that we put out this offseason seemed like it was on Brock Bowers. I don't know how, I don't know if that's the right pick here, but
that's because you wanted to pick him at the third last pick of the second round.
I would have been in, that's for sure.
I think we may have Blair back here. Blair, have we got you?
Have you got me?
We have Blair entering, and so we will get some thoughts maybe on his first pick, but back on the clock.
Yes.
Who are you most enthusiastic to get with your team name?
Most enthusiastic to have been able to hopefully pick Brock Bowers there. I am going to do something. Maybe this is weird. I don't know. Go with Lamar Jackson there. Not my normal way I would attack a draft with a quarterback in the second, but it's pretty thin at the other positions here, I feel like. Colm keeps taking my guys, so
Shawn takes Stephon Diggs. Interesting though, I just want to see Blair with yours. You took Amon-Ra the first pick,
I did,
and then Lamar Jackson. The Jackson pick there, have you him as your QB1 rest of season, or are you kind of looking at upcoming weeks here to try and make sure you make it through the cuts?
Yeah, I have. I mean, obviously his matchup this week is pretty favorable, but I do have him as my QB1 rest of season.
And Shawn, you went with Diggs, and obviously looking at some players that haven't been drafted yet. Obviously, Nico Collins has gone on injured reserve, which is unfortunate. Rules him out for 4 weeks will obviously mean he'll slide down. Players who would have been in this area of the draft, early in or throughout the offseason, the likes of Chris Olave, but Puka Nacua, for example, also out. Devontae Adams has been out. There's a lot of injuries in that area. You also have Christian McCaffrey, who at this point obviously hasn't been drafted, but probably will go quite late in this one. Tyreek Hill, though, are we just completely sunk on the Dolphins at this point? There's reports that Tua might be back as soon as week 8. Would you be in this kind of a format? Are you willing to take a risk on a player like Hill, even if it is going to be potentially another couple of weeks before you get back to what production you would have hoped to have had?
Well, I'm stashing a ton of players in our other league, but I think the price is really important there. You mentioned that I was able to get Christian McCaffrey for 3, as I paid $704 for Saquon Barkley. That team also has Nick Chubb and Jonathan Brooks being stashed there. It is extremely important to get through the week that you are in. And from that perspective,
now you are on the clock.
I think we have enough questions about their team going forward. And certainly you're going to be drafting someone who not only are they not going to potentially give you a lot of points in week 7, they're not going to give you any points in week 6. As we kind of get into this range where we're starting up with 13 teams here, we had 17 in the other, you feel like you're probably not going to be the worst team. You're not going to be chopped right up until you are. And even though we don't have a lot of teams, or you don't have as many teams, right? You don't have those 4 or 5 extra teams that we had before the season. that really thins out the player pool. But right now we also have a ton of players injured. And so from that perspective, again, it's going to be tough to fill out your roster. It's one of the reasons that, I had mentioned before that there are a lot of fun little things you can do. We talked about if there were things you needed to be aware of in this format, and I sort of joked, well, just draft the best players. The very first thing that you want to do is to not draft a QB. And so Blair playing his first Guillotine League, that was something that we didn't share with him there. We'll see how it works for him. My other question for him is, if Lamar Jackson is your QB1 rest of season, are you in the universe right now where Jaden Daniels doesn't exist?
Oh no, Jaden Daniels is QB1B.
Okay.
Daniels was tempting at the 304, even though I already had a QB.
I like it.
So I take Deebo Samuel. We're about to get back up to Kevin's pick. It's interesting, he's been injured, a couple of down weeks. I still think that he's a fine pick in that range. He goes where Blair took Zay Flowers, then Jaden Daniels, DK Metcalf. I take Deebo, T. Higgins, then DJ Moore. Kevin, you are back up. Any names standing out to you here? It is a challenging part of the draft because, as Shawn mentioned, some of those favorite targets, even if it was going to be accumulative points for the rest of the season, you could be thinking about picking those guys up. But when it is so much week to week, it's a tricky spot here as you add players to the roster. Who's the name?
I think I got to go Laporta. Let's just hope that they figured it out during the bye week. I'm just crossing my fingers that the Lions may be figuring this thing out, because every time it's come around to me, I've not really liked the names that have been on the board all that much. So
it also, I know this is only one extra additional team, having the 13 teams in here, the 17 teams, and the other one was a real challenge because you're running out of players so quick. But you are faced with a similar, if not more difficult decision in this one, because you also have to factor in the injured players who would have been available, when you were drafting. And I think we drafted that maybe 1 week before the season. So lots have changed in that particular amount of time. You take Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, the next pick that goes off the board. We will have time till we get back to Kevin's selection. I'm going to throw out some questions, I think, during it. I don't know if Blair, were you able to hear everything down to the fact that Shawn Siegele spent $704 off a $1,000 fab budget this week on Saquon Barkley? I don't know if you were able to hear all that part of the conversation. I did bid $147, which I thought I was going to have to come on to the OT podcast and explain myself to Shawn, but little did I know it was going to go in a different direction.
I did hear a bit of that, yes. I tried to say, as I was explaining my first pick, that, well, no, actually, yeah. Yeah. I think the way he's played today, and Philadelphia's already had their bye, or not today, this year, Philadelphia's already had their bye, right? So, yeah, is he the 101?
Well, we had that question in the comments. I don't think so, but tactically, I thought it was the right time to strike. I hadn't bid yet in the first 5 weeks. That had put my roster under quite a bit of pressure, really. And I certainly didn't want to be in the position that I was the favored team to get chopped for a couple more weeks as we go through these heavy buys. The initial teams that were chopped, in so many cases, they had been chopped because of terrible injury luck. And as a result of that, even though you're then putting a round 1, a round 2, a round 3 pick back into the pool, because those teams were largely getting knocked out because their very top guys had gotten hurt, you didn't have that much to choose from. Then we had a week last week where the team that got chopped was actually loaded. And so there you have a situation where you have a combination of getting chopped because of a bye and chopped because of bad luck. And so mostly I would say that everyone who's been chopped so far has been very unlucky as opposed to having built incorrectly. But this was the first chance to really take advantage of a little bit of that. if you put yourself in a position right now where you have the strongest team, you can then not necessarily coast, but wait for a bit as we move through. It's just so important to not get chopped right about the time.
So we are wrapping back around to Kevin. We are pretty spread out across the board, so there may not be that much time to fit in questions. We might put in some, season to date questions so far and things like that as we move through. Kevin, you are back up. Jalen Hurts goes off the board. Tyreek Hill, who I mentioned earlier, is after getting drafted. Who are you considering at this pick?
I know I'm thinking about James Conner, J.K. Dobbins, but at the same time, the name of Olave is really interesting there, regardless of who his QB is. And I know, last year it seems like he really kind of started taking off once Jameis Winston took over in there. So, I don't know. Spencer Rattler's kind of like the same sort of chuck it quarterback. At least that's how I feel about him, whether that's right or wrong. So I think I got to go with the big name guy, Olave, and just kind of take the risk on seeing if he can actually produce. Maybe Rattler or Hayner, whoever's the quarterback for them next week, locks in on him because he's the best receiver and he gets a ton of targets. So I don't know. I'm just going to roll the dice and see what happens, I guess.
He was somebody I was thinking of here in a couple of picks, kind of down to the same conversation points as you mentioned there. Most of the best options that are available here at the moment feel like they are potentially tight end options. So that's probably going to work out quite well for Blair and Shawn if they sneak their way back through to them. One of the names I was looking at is George Kittle. I obviously have taken Deebo Samuel, but Kittle has been very consistent so far. The one consideration then to take in is they both have week 9 bye week, so you're going to lose out on 2 key members at that particular point. Another player I was looking at was going to be Xavier Worthy, but he is on a week 6 bye when we're looking about getting through this particular week. And then Jameson Williams as well. So they are the 3 names that I have been going between, but I'm going to have to tie break it based on the Jameson Williams bye week being in the rear view mirror, and I'm going to take the shot on him here. Those other names were very tempting. If I hadn't got the buyer's pick, I think I certainly would have went with Kittle. I would be interested in your guys' thoughts as we look at the way tight end has played out through the opening 5 weeks. If the likes of Kittle, who has been putting up fantasy points, Brock Bowers and the like, if you're more likely to want to get, we obviously want to get the elite tight ends, but is it even more valuable with how the season has played out to this point?
Blair had a fantastic article on this. I guess that I think that we're going to get the elite tight ends, bouncing back, scoring quite a few points. And it's not even necessarily bouncing back exactly, as we've gotten fantastic production from George Kittle. George Kittle is the best tight end in the NFL. You have a fantastic offense around him. You have a lot of red zone upside. I guess I didn't understand the prices on him before the season. He does end up as one of our most rostered players. I don't understand the prices necessarily on him now as it contrasts to some of the other guys who are available. But the tight end is the other position along with QB where you can add them back or just add to your depth through the chops in a way that is a little bit less the case at some of the other positions. I do think it's just incredibly important to build out that running back and wide receiver depth. So I'm going to take David Montgomery here and hope that either Trey McBride, who looked fantastic in week 5, or George Kittle comes back around.
Yeah, I didn't mention the name Trey McBride because I was, kind of hopeful that he might, sneak back in the 5th round. I thought the other names were definitely going to go here. But you take David Montgomery, Blair, you take J.K. Dobbins. Is it a case here of Dobbins you expect to, be a significant player the rest of the season? We've seen him in week 1 and week 2 look very good. Now has the bye obviously to work back in. What's your optimistic, most enthusiastic take on J.K. Dobbins the rest of the season?
Let's see. Rest of the season, 1,200 yards, 10 touchdowns.
Is that all?
Right. Yeah, I mean, we have obviously seen him look really good in weeks 1 and 2, even when kind of the rest of the offense wasn't that functional. So, yeah, I'm pretty optimistic of what Dobbins can do going forward, and obviously he already has that bye behind him, so I don't have to worry about that.
So Trey McBride does go, Shawn, at the turn with CJ Stroud, so he's not going to make it back in. George Kittle is still there. 2 picks away. Who are you hoping that will make it back to you here? And so far throughout 4 rounds, how challenging have you found this draft versus the first Guillotine draft? There's always a wrinkle or two sprinkled in with these OT listener league drafts.
Yeah, it's right now the fun part is trying to decide where everybody else is going to go.
Yeah.
What is the best build? Do you want to go with your favorites who are maybe still a little bit thin, or do you go ahead and just take not exactly the values, but the safer plays?
Next.
The Guillotine leagues do reward not like a safe approach, but one where you are aware of floor, right? And you, again, have to be very aware of positional value. This is tough because I do think that James Conner should definitely be gone. James Conner, George Kittle.
Got to get that third running back, Shawn.
George Kittle's too good.
Now you are on the clock.
I was also secretly hoping you'd take Conner there. But maybe I will.
You don't have to.
I don't have to. There are a couple other interesting names.
The one name I'm looking at for, that probably will sneak back to me, and it is that there's a couple of week 6 players available, and it's going to be how aggressive you want to get on. Like, can you get the rest of the roster to get you through this first week? Because if you get through this week with those week 6 bye players, the likes of an Achan, for example, or a Worthy, you're set up really well then moving forward. So there's that risk reward part. And Shawn, you mentioned the floor element. He takes James Conner. You mentioned the floor element. I have found that, like, one of the kind of things we talked about during my draft previously in the Guillotine League was that I basically have no functioning running backs on my roster. And trying to find them on the waiver wire, as Shawn mentioned, with the injuries has been very, very tough. I thought that was something that would allowed me to pick up very, very quickly, once 1 or 2 teams got chopped. But
you should have been more than 120 for Saquon Barkley today.
It was 147, Shawn. Come on. And that was too much. But what I have found is the aggressiveness has been, the players who put up the big points have been the reason that I've stayed safe throughout this early portion in terms of not being cut. Players like Malik Neighbors, like Jaden Reed having big days have kind of covered up the rest of the roster, because you only need to avoid that one other team in those early times to make it through. I'm going to just have to do it. I'm going to take Xavier Worthy. So we're taking, that's the first one of the bye week players. I was between him, Achan, and Kincaid there, adding another tight end. Obviously, you have the flex positions where you can have them. Shawn mentioned some of the parts of it, being able to replace them potentially through the waivers as well. But it also does really depend, as we've seen, Shawn, in our league, with the teams getting cut. Is it injuries? How has it happened? The Rashee Rice team obviously got cut last week with obviously then, you're not going to pick up a player who obviously was one of their star players when drafted. But I take Worthy, up to 4 wide receivers, the 1 tight end. We'll see. It feels like we'll be patching together those running backs as we try and move throughout the rest of the draft. Kevin, 1 pick before you select next. You have 3 wide receivers and a tight end: Harrison, Smith, Olave, Laporta. How are you feeling now? You mentioned the 10th spot being tough in round 1. Are you feeling any better at this point?
Not especially, no. So yeah, full disclosure, this is the first Guillotine draft that I've ever done. And now I'm kind of, when I see some players go off the board after I already picked, I'm like, oh yeah, I should be scrolling down a lot farther. Like that's one thing I can like tell anybody, because these ADPs are still kind of sticking to anchoring to some other prior ADPs.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I should have taken Tank Dell like a while back, or I should have taken, Trey McBride or Laporte or whatever, but he was just the name that was there. So I'm having some rookie mistakes here. So, but to answer your question, no, I'm not feeling really all that much better about it right now. Kind of feel like I don't know what the status of. I'm just going to get a little silly now. I don't know what the status of Zach Moss is, but I feel pretty good about drafting Chase Brown right here as my RB1. So we'll see how that goes. I heard he may have a high ankle sprain. I don't know if it's one of the mild ones that seems to be going around now or a real one, but really like Chase Brown, especially after that offense did well this week. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, he's been factored in quite a bit more over the last couple of weeks. Definitely was a target for me coming back in this following round. So I think that's a good pickup there. Somebody we were very bullish on, heading into the season. But even if we look through, like, it's interesting to see the board and to see some of the ADPs versus what they would have been. Would that have been a value, or would that have been a way ahead of ADP in the offseason? Like I mentioned with the Bowers pick, obviously we can put J.K. Dobbins into that conversation for Blair there in the 4th round. We are moving through. We will have 6 picks before your next pick, Kevin. We'll have some time here, I think, for a quick question. Blair, is there a player that's either been your favorite player that you're like, wish you drafted more of this offseason, or a player that you didn't draft very much of that you kind of wish you had drafted more of? We know for Shawn that player is Saquon Barkley, but is there a different name for you?
I guess, yeah, that's a good question. Player I'm most excited about is probably Malik Neighbors, but I did draft a lot of him. So to say I wish I had drafted more, even though that's probably true, does sound kind of funny. But I've been really excited about what he's doing. I mean, James Conner, the guy I just picked in the last round, is someone who I've been pleasantly surprised by. Didn't have a lot of him in the offseason, probably until closer to the start of the season, when kind of the news on Benson was starting to turn a little bit pessimistic, but I wish I had drafted more of him, I think.
Shawn, have you a name in mind that fits that category? I mentioned on RotoViz OT, I think it was actually the week before Rice got injured, that he was the player at that point that I thought that I just wish I had so much more of. Obviously, the landscape changes very quickly and dramatically in the NFL. Brian Thomas, he goes in the 3rd round of this particular draft, 302. He's somebody that I don't have very much of, but me and Shawn talked about him this week on OT. He has just looked excellent through his first 5 weeks in the NFL. So he, for me, would fit that category. Shawn, who do you wish that you had drafted more on your rosters? And for us, like, it's very hard to draft more, Brock Bowers, for example, because we drafted all of the Brock Bowers.
Yeah, I think that Nico Collins was the clear answer, even though during main event season got a lot. And so now it's a pretty big dagger. One of the things that has just repeatedly happened so far are those guys that you wish you had more of have then more or less been injured the following week. It has been encouraging to see so many of the FFPC Best Ball leagues going so well, to have so many of the main events going so well. And the injuries are so frustrating, and yet going into the buys, having the injured players, teams now having to go beyond their starting lineup. The thing that I'm certainly finding is that the RotoViz approach and having so many good players, that I'm fairly optimistic about how all of that is going to work as we think through the next month. Can you gap opponents, even though you yourself obviously are also dealing with some of those injuries. You can't escape it. A bunch more people, even as we record, are having injuries announced for them. Yeah, the players I'm most excited about certainly are Jaden Reed and some of the guys who have already been mentioned. Now, I have a huge amount of Reed. It's one of these elements where the guys that you were on who hit, you always wish you had more, but as you work through it, it's difficult to manage that in a way that is not even riskier than it already is. And just to throw another name out there, Jamar Chase, who went 101 in this draft, is someone where the size of his hits, and Blair has been very aggressive, throughout the last several years and certainly this year in ranking him. His big games can be so big, whereas there's been a lot of enthusiasm around Justin Jefferson. He goes 105 in this draft. He should go at least that early. I would kind of grill Blair on the Amon-Ra St. Brown selection now that we are seeing what they're doing with the two running backs. We're seeing what Jameson Williams has been able to do. Sam Laporta is coming. But Sam Darnold, a below average NFL starting quarterback. And that means even though in a game last week where Justin Jefferson has all of these air yards, I just don't think that the ceiling for a Jefferson in this type of offense can be what Jamar Chase can do, can be what CeeDee Lamb can do, even though Lamb has been disappointing, to this point. It'll be interesting to track those guys. Yeah, I mean, if you asked that question 2 weeks ago, there are a lot of names, but so many of those names have subsequently suffered really unfortunate injuries.
So I am back up on the clock. I was considering Dalton Kincaid. Was considering Bucky Irvin. I think at this point of the draft with the names that have gone, and Shawn mentioned the floor element. Yeah, I'm still going to go Bucky Irvin. I almost went. Almost went with Joe Mixon there, but went with the Bucky Irvin pick. So that's my first running back. Looking, again to have that long term growth as well on the roster. So we're filling up here with quite a nice 4 rookies.
You are up next.
Maybe not as much floor as we would be looking to build throughout one of these rosters. We'll see how it plays out here as we get closer to the end. Kevin, I didn't get to you. Is there a name for you that you wish that you had some more of? Or maybe you just drafted a lot of them and you're very happy with how it's going?
Yeah. I mean, drafted a ton of Bowers, which is coming.
Now you are on the clock.
Seeing his breakout coming to fruition. Same with Jaden Daniels. They're my top 2 guys. JSN is my 3rd highest drafted player. So that's kind of wishy-washy, but I'm super happy with all the risk taking on that. And that's not a super big surprise for us. I mean, just drafting generally the way that we draft, I kind of wish I had maybe had a little more Derrick Henry's, a fun team to watch or a fun player to watch this season. There's just a lot of those guys, the guys that are generally aren't on my radar, dead zone running backs. Sometimes when you see them go off for 33 points 2 weeks in a row, you kind of wish you had a little more of them on your rosters. But at the end of the day, sticking to the plan, and I'm generally pretty happy with how my portfolio shook out at this point.
Blair, you had to make a call when you were on the clock. You drafted a man who I'm not sure wants to play in the NFL anymore, in George Pickens.
I missed some news.
No, you didn't miss any news. But just with some of the effort level against the Dallas Cowboys, we see a lot of just strange stuff from Pickens from different times. Spectacular plays to then just not a lot of spectacular nature to the effort. What's your outlook here on Pickens the rest of the way, and any reason that Russell Wilson should be the quarterback for the Steelers? I'm still seeing the door is open for that to happen this week.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think Fields has been doing enough. Steelers, I believe, are still tied for first in the division. Yeah, Pickens is not necessarily the name I wanted to click there. I was really hoping Chuba Hubbard would fall to me, but he does have some enormous upside. We've seen him put up huge games. I like his talent. I don't love the offense. It's already getting tough to make picks that you feel good about, I think.
Yeah, it's very challenging at this particular point. Shawn takes Jalen Waddle, who I did talk about earlier, with the week 6 bye, also with the quarterback concerns. But there is that chance that if you get through week 6, you get through week 7, that, Tua may be back, and that changes the outlook a lot. It has been tough for those Dolphins wide receivers, players who, again, you would have been very happy with to draft and want to have high percentages off them. But then you get into the situation where, obviously, once Tua goes down, it's difficult sledding there at the moment. Shawn, how are you feeling about that roster so far through 6 rounds with Lamb, Diggs, Cook, Montgomery, Kittle, and Waddle?
Being able to get that number 3 overall pick and to start with Lamb, that sets you up to do so many different things. The round 2 selection of Diggs ahead of Drake London. London, obviously, with the massive game there in week 5, as Kirk Cousins announces that maybe he is healthy and back, and that he is going to be able to do for that offense what guys like Brock Purdy and Matthew Stafford have done for the Rams and the 49ers. So I do really like the team that's being built out of the second slot as well. Barkley, London, Brian Thomas. That really is probably the answer to the question that you asked previously, where he has more or less been what I think people would have hoped to get from Aroma Dunze. Then you have Shaheed. That one may be a little bit more controversial. We'll see if they can keep executing those plays. We know they are difficult, but then JSN, Kyler Murray, a great price there on Murray, even if you're waiting at the QB position. But being able to get Cook, being able to get Montgomery, guys who are just not that exciting, but are a perfect fit for this. Now, James Cook is exciting from the perspective of the plays that he makes are absolutely electric. His fantasy points over expectation right now, as I was putting together the Zero RB universe for this week, I believe he's above 4 per game. His peripherals, however, are a little bit more disconcerting. So we'll see what
You are up
the
next.
Bills offense is able to do, what how his role evolves. He's been running a little bit hot on touchdowns. Certainly there's a path for that to not work out. Kenneth Walker, I was really hoping would come back through in round 3. He did go at the 301. It was another bit of a similar situation there with Tank Bigsby, where I think that he was
Now
the guy
you are on the clock.
that maybe has that massive upside, thinking back through where the running backs are now. ETN goes in the middle of round 5. We're now into early 7. ETN, one of our favorite players. I do think that he's going to still have a strong rest of the season. His receiving peripherals remain strong. But Bigsby, he didn't just score in last week's game. He looked absolutely fantastic. And I do think that Bigsby is there to stay because of that injury. If you're a running back and your shoulder is dinged up, it just makes it very difficult because you're going to keep getting hit, right? There's no other way around it. I did sort of wait until I made the selection at 703. I don't know that, again, it's the best thing structurally, especially taking Jalen Waddle, who won't play this week, and then maybe has a couple more weeks before he gets back to what we're hoping he is. But one of the reasons that I almost took Connor at the 503 is that I don't know that there is a huge difference between the tight ends who are available there and simply Tucker Kraft. I guess I'm shocked that he makes it all the way back through to the 703. I probably would have taken him at the 610 if I hadn't kind of lost track of the fact that that had been my plan as we're sort of chatting back and forth. I think from a structural perspective now, one of the questions that I'll have to answer for myself, is there somebody in round 5 who went subsequently who just would have made this team that much stronger? I don't know that there is. A lot of the receivers who have gone in the interim are either injured or there are other contextual things that make them tricky plays?
I am back on the clock. I did mention I passed on Joe Mixon the last time around, so I'm going to have to take him here. There is a good chance, talking about week 6, that he misses out again this week, but I think with all the names gone, I'm going to take that risk and add him in here to this team. We're talking about players that, drafting in the offseason. I don't know if I have any Joe Mixon teams, so maybe this is my first exposure to get him on the roster here, but adding it in with Bucky Irvine to the running back room. I don't want to really go through. I don't want to give Kevin some of the names that I've added to the queue here as potential. But there's some wide receivers here that are interesting, some running backs that are interesting. But kind of you want to see if you can get them a round or two down the line. Shawn mentioned Tucker Kraft in the 7th. It is going to be, as a Packers fan, awesome to see how his season ticks along here now the rest of the way. For anyone who did get a chance to watch any of the he was mic'd up for that game against the Rams, and he is a pretty wild dude when you hear him talking anytime he's interviewed. But some fun clips going around on social media from that. Kevin, you are one pick away. You have now Chase Brown, Javonte Williams, both guys who I was kind of hoping maybe some of them would sneak back to me in that last 6th round range. Who are you hoping makes it one more pick here to you? Jake Ferguson went the pick after I selected. Who's someone that you're looking forward to? And I'll come up with another in-season topic to fill the gap after your pick.
I'm kind of leaning Shakir right now. I really like what he has done so far with Josh Allen. He seems like he's a security blanket. It's either right now for me, it's between Shakir or Christian Kirk. So Kirk is coming on a little bit, but I just don't trust that Jacksonville offense. So I think I'm just going to roll the dice on Shakir here because I want to keep filling out these wide receivers. I only have 3 right now. So just hoping that he comes back this week. And I just checked and it says that he's day-to-day as far as his injury goes. So hoping he comes back and, keeps producing.
Is there any players, Blair, that you have drafted a lot of that they're it feels like they're kind of simmering at the moment that, they haven't, we're talking about a Brian Thomas who let's say Malik Neighbors, it's clear that things are going in the right direction. Brock Bowers is clear that things are going in the right direction. Is there any names that you drafted this offseason that they're just kind of coming along under the surface that you're expecting to really take off from this point forward?
Do you count what Troy Franklin's doing as simmering? He's kind of...
Well, that's not catching passes.
That's kind of... Yeah, but target is in the end zone. That's kind of like right when you turn on the stove and it hasn't quite come up to a simmer yet. I think we saw kind of Tyrone Tracy come on last week. That's maybe too big of a breakout to be called a simmer anymore, but I think
I guess when you touch on him, is he, we talked me and Shawn a little bit about the situation with Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet. Charbonnet had a great game 2 weeks ago, but then once Walker was back, pretty much eliminated in that Monday Night Football game against the Lions. Do you think that it's a 50-50 split now when Singletary comes back, or do you think that they might lean back in towards the veteran again?
Yeah, I would guess that Singletary gets probably more likely to get the bigger end of the 50-50 or a little bit more, but I do think what Tracy did was good enough that you can't take him off the field entirely. So if it's a 50-50 split, that wouldn't surprise me. If Singletary comes back and Tracy still gets more of the work, that wouldn't surprise me either.
So you're saying you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
So before we get back to Kevin, Shawn, have you anyone that's fitting into that category? Do you want to go with?
I was just thinking about Blair's analogy, and it seemed to me more that the Troy Franklin situation there is when you've been out for hours and hours, and we're like, oh, I left the stove on. I hope
My house didn't burn down.
Right. I just catch that pass. That was a heartbreaker. But I know I agree. They have no receivers. The guys they're trotting out there, like Cortland Sutton, is so washed / just like as a big guy who doesn't separate and also isn't remotely interested. And yet he's so much better than Josh Reynolds and Lil Jordan Humphrey. He's still the guy who draws the targets. But it has to be Franklin. It has to be. That whole Marvin Mims thing is kind of crazy. It'll be interesting to watch. They obviously have the late round rookie who I do think is going to come back into play. Rico Dowdle goes here at 803. He's the first running back to go after Joe Mixon. I guess I'm a little bit surprised by that after he looked so good on Sunday night. And I do think the Ezekiel Elliott experiment, it has to be more or less over, even though they used him a decent amount there. I think that the risk with a player like Dalvin Cook is lessened. Now, one of the problems that Dowdle really does have is that he's going to hit some of these very difficult matchups, similar to what happened with Alvin Kamara in week 5. And the matchups do matter. You have a dramatic difference in how different NFL teams are approaching the running game and how you stop it. So we'll see there, but I was impressed by him. Josh Downs, a fantastic pick there from Kevin. I hope that he's okay. I bet 800 on him in an FFPC league last week and did get him. You like him a lot more when Joe Flacco is the QB, but the other note is that now there's reporting that Michael Pittman is going to go on IR.
Yeah.
So that'll be an interesting one. You had all the notes about the rapport during training camp between Anthony Richardson and Josh Downs, but Richardson's huge arm has just looked a lot better when he's targeting guys down the field.
So that was the pick Kevin made, was Josh Downs. I did Christian Watson after Dontavian Wicks did go at the spot 2 picks before that. I'm interested because I know Blair is a big Dontavian Wicks guy, and we have seen him have that huge game against the Vikings a couple of weeks ago. It's well known at this point, some issues with drops and catching the ball, and quite a few situations where he just has to make those plays. I still, now that Christian Watson has stayed relatively healthy, had the ankle sprain, he's back at training, back at practice, seems like he will, if not available this week, will be back heading into week 7 for sure. I think rest of season, I'd probably still take Christian Watson over Wicks on the Packers roster. Am I crazy, Blair? Shawn says yes.
A little bit crazy. Oh man, I'm thinking of doing something crazy though right now. As I'm on the clock.
Shawn, tell me why I'm crazy.
Well, because Dontavian Wicks is both so much better and Christian Watson is hurt. So
it seems like he's less hurt than people may have expected. I think that he's going to be back sooner rather than later.
Well, I'm throwing a big bid out there for him in an
left.
FFPC league as well today, because I do think there is that possibility that
I think he
goes on a run, right? Because
no
Dobbs now it sounds like is going to be back, but he's going to be filtered out of the offense, at least to an extent, you would think. And there's not going to be any effort to, some of the times these things work the other direction, but I think that Dobbs has burned the Packers. It's going to be those other 3 guys. Wicks is someone who gets open, and that's such a big deal. It's so easy after a frustrating game where, you and I lost in the main event in part because we played him, he didn't score, and he has more drops. But the 20 and probably 30-point games, I think, are coming. There's nothing that we've seen from Christian Watson to this point that makes you think that those types of games are coming. It's mostly a matter of he needs to catch the ball in the red zone, and he has that potential to have that sort of Jameson Williams type of play where you catch a 60 or 70-yard touchdown. What they're doing and what they have done and how these players have moved through the early parts of their careers, he doesn't look like the guy who probably has the potential to become a target hog.
Shawn adds the 3rd tight end in Evan Ingram. Obviously, he has missed the majority of the start of the season with that hamstring injury. Loading up on those tight ends, Shawn, going to make sure we have packed tight end room.
Well, I really hate that I took George Kittle in round 5 because, I mean, again, Tucker Kraft and Evan Ingram should have gone so much earlier.
And we'll wrap back around. Sean's back on the clock. Who are you gonna take here?
Well, it seems like it's Patrick Mahomes' time.
Now
right?
you are on the clock.
We've waited and waited and waited, but now that they've unlocked Juju Smith-Schuster, off to the races.
Are you concerned, that the game plan will just be to run this offense through Kareem Hunt after the bye week? And are you also concerned that Patrick Mahomes is on a bye this week?
No. I really should have picked Joe Burrow, but when you have the shot at Patrick Mahomes at that point,
You got to take it.
you got to take. I think they're going to look very good. Andy Reid, I mean, that was about as serious a regular season face as I've ever
15
seen on
seconds left.
him. He was out for blood against the Saints there. They moved the ball at will. They're going to put up some big time points. I mean, this is a Chiefs team that, with everything else that is going on in the NFL and so many of the weaknesses from other squads, I certainly don't think that they're going to go undefeated. I do think they're going to gap the rest of the AFC. He now has a chance to put his stamp on the offense, the team, and history. Because with all of the injuries that they've had, it's going to be pretty difficult for anybody to come back and be like, oh, well, you were carried by, Rashee Rice and what have you. If Juju Smith-Schuster is going for the types of games that he went for against the Saints, if Kareem Hunt is your starting running back, and people know at this point that Patrick Mahomes has struggled a bit over the last couple of years. I mean, this is the chance for Andy Reid to become the greatest NFL football coach of all time. And I think he's going to do it.
It is pretty much, we're getting into that territory where it's not outlandish to say those sort of things, but still a couple more rings to get on those fingers. I think they put him fully into that conversation. I take Jalen Warren. Reports that he is likely doubtful for this week, but is practicing, so moving in the right direction, trying to fit this. I'm looking at each pick, and I'm like, the safe pick is there. Just take, a running back who's going to play this week, but we'll worry about that as the roster goes on. We have bye weeks and we have injured players. It's coming together in a weird way so far. There's a lot of picks left to go, though. Back up for Kevin. Kevin, what's the selection here?
I was going to go Braylon Allen. I was hoping that either Mahomes or Burrow would make it to me, but no dice. But so I was just going to go Braylon Allen now. Just hope that kind of the shakeup in New York helps him out, and Breece Hall, obviously. And I said all the teams around the turn all have quarterbacks, so I was probably just going to try to pick up Jared Goff. I feel like it's getting a little late in the game to not have a quarterback. Well, some of these options further down the list aren't super appealing, so maybe like one or two guys after Goff that I would be interested in taking, but I figure I'll just kind of get it over and done with now.
The last question I asked Blair was about kind of players similar and under the radar. I guess the next question is the zero RB, whether it's a rookie or not, running backs that are ready to, take over that job. It really feels like probably Bucky Irving's the clear candidate. You mentioned, though, earlier you wanted Chuba Hubbard to make it back to you. We obviously have their rookie running back selection coming back pretty soon, I would expect, and he's going to be factored in there heavily. Jalen Warren has been injured, but he's working his way back. Chase Brown has, he's gone in the 5th round, and this week's probably starting to push his way towards that content. Is there anyone here that's ready to step up and take over a backfield in that zero RB mold?
Yeah, we kind of touched on Tracy. I think Bucky Irving's the other big name. Yeah, I mean, the problem, I guess, with guys like Warren, and not a rookie, but still, guys like Jonathan Brooks, is that they're not currently playing. The there are some other names that haven't gone off the board that I'm interested in and
You
probably
don't wanna
won't say
share.
out loud. So, but yeah.
Shawn, any of the names that have gone off the board so far that you expect to take a big step forward in the next 3 or 4 weeks?
Guys who have already been picked. Well, I think that the stashing of Puka and TJ Hawkinson at the 9-10 turn here is a really nice play for that drafter. We saw what Jalen Tolbert can do, especially maybe when they have to emphasize him a little bit more with Brandon Cooks out. I'm excited to see what one of the things that you sometimes get, and that we've gotten with Tolbert to an extent, I think we've gotten with Chase Brown to an extent, are these situations where the preseason narrative is very enthusiastic and you're thinking, okay, we're going to get a fast start from these guys if they can do it. And then they start slowly and you're thinking, well, that was all, just purely puff. And then it turns out the team still, when the game was live, needed to see them do it and wanted to bring them on a little bit more slowly. It didn't mean that everything that was written about them was, made up, was coach speak, what have you. I'm excited for him because he is a more dynamic playmaker. It probably helps the Cowboys a little bit to have Brandon Cooks out and you simply deploy the next wave of talent. I do think it helps the Bengals a lot to have Chase Brown out there carrying the ball. One of the notes for him in the Zero RB universe for this week is that he ranks number 4 in positive play percentage among backs with 30 plus carries. But the weird thing there, and one of the reasons why it's probably a mistake to get too caught up in that, he's the only one in the top 7 who's also in the positive in points above average. So he has the explosiveness. He's been very successful. If you want to look at play by play, is he able to create consistent positive yardage as well? I still think that Chase Brown has the potential to do what James Cook does for the Bills, but maybe in an offense that's actually a little bit more favorable for the running back position. So those would be guys. And again, part of it is we were on these guys before the season. You're a little bit disappointed. Now you're getting a little bit of reason to believe that there's something there. So you lean into it. But again, the reason that we were excited in the first place is that the evidence was pointing in that direction. So I'm excited to see how those guys perform. I do think that Wandale, someone we've written about extensively, is low-key one of the coolest early stories here. I think that Daniel Jones, maybe not as much in his own right as a fantasy football asset, but what he does for the offense. And then as a mobile quarterback, someone who, as we go through the buys, as we have some more QB injuries, he's been so inconsistent in his NFL career, but an interesting player, especially when he's playing pretty well. So I think the Giants are a fun story right now, where you have the quarterback fighting for not just his job, but his career. You have Tyrone Tracy. You've got Wandale. You've got maybe the most electric rookie we've had in a long time. When you think about Justin Jefferson, you think about Jamar Chase, what those guys did. Malik Neighbors, without that concussion, right, he's going to blow by them. Man, I hope that he can play this week. If he is held out, then certainly we'll be behind that. But then you hope that in week 7, he can come out there and just pick up where he left off, because that dude is unreal.
Yeah, he looks absolutely fantastic. And anytime you have a concussion where it's a week beyond and you're still not practicing fully, or even in a limited capacity, is obviously concerning. So the player's health comes first there. He is somebody obviously I've drafted in this. I did draft another Giant who's banged up at the moment in Devin Singletary in the 10th round here. I am kind of trying to factor in looking at the roster that I'm putting together, players who will be active this coming week, and trying to factor in a lineup to do with that. Obviously, he seems like he is on track to play this week. So I could be in a situation here where this roster is all over the place come this week, but we're looking ahead beyond that. Then one of the things that I didn't do in that other draft was go with running backs at all. So we'll see how it's going to go with this roster. But it has.
I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but if he doesn't play, you're going to be the projected chop.
I think so. There's quite a few players here that there's going to be Q tags beside coming up to this week. But Shawn, let's be risky. Let's go for it. It was getting to a point here where when looking through a lot of the names, you're starting to look into the QB options that would be available. Dak Prescott went a couple of picks before. Anthony Richardson is another player who, you're looking into the health of the player and drafting him at this point of the draft. So he would have been a consideration with the week 14 bye as well. So I kind of chickened out of that one just on I think there's going to be a lot of quarterbacks available later in this draft. And that was something that we did see with that other one. And you mentioned, previously with the cutting of players, particularly at the QB position, and being able to try and add to your roster through the waiver process. Obviously, you have to make it through the first week to be able to do that. That is the position that I've put myself in at the minute. Blair, you're back up on the clock. You have 3 wide receivers at this point. Are you concerned? Now you have 4. You've added Jerry Jeudy. How are you feeling about the balance of the roster so far?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned. I probably should have taken a wide receiver instead of Lamar Jackson in the second. But we'll get it. We'll figure it out. Jeudy has a pretty good matchup this week, so hopefully he can actually do something. But he's obviously not sort of played up to certainly my expectations for this season. But we'll give
how much of that is on the QB in Cleveland?
I think so. Yeah, and maybe we'll get a new QB this week, which should help.
Yeah, well, we have boots on the ground, or we certainly have a Cleveland Browns fan on the show here. What can we do with obviously we have the quarterback contract to deal with, but can we get Jameis in there for some reps?
I hope so. It just seems like the whole team is tied up into Shawn and like making sure that he tries to succeed, which doesn't seem very likely at this point. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'll be a bigger Browns fan if I know that Deshaun Watson isn't their quarterback anymore. If he could just pay him what you owe him. You made a mistake, just jettison him and call it a day. Like that's kind of where I'm at on it. But right now it just seems like they're really sticking to their guns, and there's probably a lot of people who are going to lose their jobs if he does not play. So hopefully eventually they wise up and swallow their ego and we can just move on with our lives and just forget that this ever happened for these 3 years or whatever.
And I don't know what the number is on Jerry Jeudy, but I did see earlier this week that Amari Cooper's catchable targets this season has been at 40%. So that means that 60% of the targets to Cooper have been uncatchable. So you can say that Jerry Jeudy or Amari Cooper aren't living up to expectations.
You're up next.
I think the reason for that is Deshaun Watson. Shawn takes Jonathan Brooks, especially adding him as a third running back. I think so, and I'm excited to see him get onto the field with the Panthers. And obviously, he's in a better situation now than he would have been, I think, if he was coming into a Bryce Young offense with Andy Dalton in there. So excited to see him coming in. Shawn also adds Adonai Mitchell. Somebody, Shawn, that we talked about in the offseason, in terms of best ball drafts as well. Still optimistic rest of season. You mentioned, Anthony Richardson and the deep targets. He's obviously somebody that could benefit from that.
Yeah, they have a little bit of a traffic jam there that now potentially is going to be alleviated because of the Michael Pittman injury. And
15 seconds left.
I mean, Josh Downs is supposedly not healthy either. But Mitchell is the guy out of this group where you could get a superstar. And he's also the player where you have a potential superstar who's a perfect fit with the quarterback. I think that he can be the next guy to elevate in the same way that we do expect Aroma Dunze to come on as you move through the course of the season. I think our expectations for Mitchell, not that they should be similar, but there is going to be some parallel in the trajectory there. And now he's been possibly freed up a little bit. The thing that has been so interesting with Alec Pierce, who goes a couple of picks later, is that, I mean, there's a Rashid Shaheed element there where every week you have that splash play and it seems impossible that you're going to get another one, and yet you keep getting another one. And last week you had the one where he gets called down instead of scoring the touchdown, so you just score the touchdown on the next drive. His story, I think, has been really cool. I'm still, in some ways, surprising that he's going after someone like a Quentin Johnston, whom we do like, someone like a Tutu, who hopefully doesn't get too many more chances and those guys come back. Maybe I'm overly enthusiastic about what Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are still going to do this year. But I like these Colts guys as we're looking for names. Certainly I like Jerry Jeudy. He was one of the names in my queue. You think back to what Jameis Winston has done at some different stops, where if they allow him just to chuck it, it could be so much fun there. At the same time, it kind of blows my mind that the backup quarterback for the Browns is someone else who, I mean, where's the public relations firm dealing with the Browns? And like there are other options out there.
They're just leaning into their identity.
Yeah, they're like, you thought that we were embarrassed to give someone a massive contract when they've assaulted 25, 26, 30 women, probably more. But how about these more serious assaults that our backup quarterback has committed? Can we get some more coverage of that? And it's like, is this sleight of hand? Is this distraction? I don't think that there's any way to get the focus there off of the starter. Having said that, Colm, you picked Jalen Polk. We are going to get Drake Maye. Is Jalen Polk going to come with him? Shootouts now for the New England Patriots.
That's one of the reasons that I kind of went that direction. I don't necessarily know if it's going to be a pick that works out, for season long or for week long in this year's situation. What I do think is that the offense, if it's going to take a step forward, could do it pretty quickly. I mentioned this to you off air, I think it was Shawn, after they announced that, Maye was coming in to start this week. It is a situation where that offensive line is tragically bad. It's putting your rookie quarterback into a really tough situation, but we would expect him to go in there and hopefully be better than Jacoby Brissett, and maybe the offense is moving forward. I also, he's getting targets. He's not really getting the receptions. He's got one touchdown. He almost had a touchdown in week 6 where he gets 1 foot down, gets his toe down, but then obviously the heel comes down out of bounds. That would have won them that game in week 6 late in the fourth quarter against the Dolphins this past week. So I think there's some promising signs there. And the quarterback change, I think he's a player who could potentially change in value quite a bit, as this mid-season point between now and say week 8, week 9, week 10. And also based on the fact that I'm looking for players who can start this week on this roster. It might be a risky play, but that's where he's coming in. My question was going to be, when I took that pick to set it up, was kind of what Shawn asked me with Drake Maye coming in. I know some people were on the Jacoby Brissett side for the best ball drafting this offseason, some people on the Drake Maye side. I've heard from listeners on both sides of that. But now that we have had the change, I don't expect them to at any point go back to Brissett. Blair, are you optimistic about the Patriots? It's hard to be optimistic on what we've seen through 5 weeks, but when you say it has to be better, hasn't it? But does it actually have to be better?
Yeah, I guess it doesn't have to be better, but I'm still optimistic about Drake Maye. I mean, Brissett, he obviously hasn't looked good. Even if Maye is maybe a little more mobile, takes fewer sacks, like even that can make a big difference for the offense, I think. So I'm pretty optimistic.
Yeah, so hopefully we see an improvement there. Just again, we want to see all the teams scoring points. It's obviously going to be better for fantasy moving forward. Kevin, you do add in Raheem Mostert to your lineup here. Obviously on a bye this week, coming back in the following week. He's somebody who's missed a good chunk of the season here as well. The Miami backfield has been pretty banged up, as well as obviously the quarterback position. We've seen some Jalen Wright in week 6. You think that Mostert is still the RB2 in that backfield after what we have seen the limited sample size from Wright so far?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was debating when I made that pick. But I think just his history and the fact that, of what he did last year, I think he probably has Mike McDaniel's trust, maybe a little more than Jalen Wright. But, I mean, Jalen Wright did outproduce him this week. So so you never really know. But I'm just more of like, okay, he has another week to heal. Achane will probably be back, but there could be, he could miss time. So I just figured I'd just take the shot on him. Because he obviously scored 20 touchdowns last year, 18 rushing touchdowns. So I think that's something that's worth betting on this late in the game.
Blair loves a rookie running back being able to take over a backfield. I mentioned about players earlier who could be in that position. I do think as the season goes on that if Wright can produce, I think he could work his way past Mostert. Are you optimistic that could be the case, or am I over enthusiastic?
Yeah, Wright was one of the names that I didn't want to mention out loud because I might want to take him later. But, yeah, I am pretty optimistic about Wright. I don't know that I definitely think he could overtake Mostert in that backfield. And if Tua comes back and that offense kind of turns things around and gets back to what we have seen in the past, there's certainly enough production in that backfield for, say, both Achane and Wright to have value.
Yeah, if you are a right drafter, obviously, Kevin, this is for this team, but if you're a right drafter, that's kind of what you're hoping, is that you move into that position where you surpass Mostert, and then you can try to replicate kind of between the fantasy points that Mostert and Achane put up last season. Again, I keep coming around here. Anthony Richardson keeps showing up. I keep moving beyond him. And Blair, I do have some unfortunate news for you. I want to draft Jalen Wright.
Yeah. This is why I didn't say anything.
Well, I had it kind of set up for myself that that was where I was going to go when it came back around. So we do take him there. The difficult part for me that I almost was going to bypass, I was going to take Jaleel with that pick. Jaleel
You
McLaughlin.
are up next.
He goes 2 picks before. He's a player who can actually play this week, which Jalen Wright can't because he's on a bye. So that was the player I was hoping that would have made it to me was Wright. The other one, the question I was going to have is the Bears. Roschon Johnson has just been selected. The Bears have started to put up some running back fantasy points. We did get Roschon Johnson getting 2 short rushing touchdowns this past week, as it seems to be just something that follows DeAndre Swift around, that he just can't get those runs inside the 5-yard line. Do you think that kind of Roschon can move? What is the truth about this Bears backfield as we move forward? They're kind of both of those guys scoring this past week. Swift looking a little bit better over the last couple of weeks. Shawn, the Bears backfield, what's the truth?
The Bears are so squirrely. I'm happy for DeAndre Swift that he's played better. The numbers for Roschon outside of the goal line plunges are not particularly good. And yet, because he is that high value touch guy, I think that he has a very strong chance to
15
overtake
seconds left.
Swift at some point. Now, the thunder and lightning element that they have going is great for them. It is encouraging. I do think that it's a little bit of a fluke, right? It's a little bit of that flash in the pan kind of element, and you're going to get a lot more games going forward where the pie is pretty small. I guess I'm a little bit skeptical that the most recent games are more indicative than the early games, where both Swift look bad, there isn't rushing value to go around. The play calling is going to have to improve. Caleb Williams is going to have to continue to evolve to make sure that the defenses feel threatened enough. One of the issues that Shane Waldron has had is a lack of creativity and a lack of route combinations that open these players up in a way that you can be dynamic with them. I think they've got to attack more vertically. They were able to get DJ Moore free for the touchdowns last week, but it has to be more than the one game, right? So we'll see what they're able to do going forward. But Roschon at that price, a very fun pick, a nice 0 RB selection. He's put Khalil Herbert so far in the rear view that I think that as well makes him a great contingency-based pick here. Blair, I would be willing to make a trade with you. I have George Kittle, Tucker Kraft, Evan Ingram. You just selected the tight end for a team that if they could quick kick without the media jumping all over them, they would just do that, right? This whole discussion of like, is it Justin Fields?
You are up next.
Is it Russell Wilson? They're like, we don't want to play offense at all. We don't know how much more we can do to demonstrate that.
Yeah, I don't know.
You are on the clock.
Well, I'm looking at a few different tight end options here and trying to decide, do I just pick the guy who's like ranked high, but I think his team is in a game has like a 36.5 total in week 6 or something. And I did, so I don't know. There we go. Maybe this will make up for it. Probably not.
Oh, yeah, he was in the queue here. Cole Kmet is the player that Blair adds in to go with Pat Freiermuth. Shawn, are you stockpiling these quarterbacks?
Well, I said that the tactics were you don't take tight ends, you don't take QBs, but you get to a certain point where the players are inexpensive enough. And the other thing that's been very fun about the Guillotine League is that there are some guys in free agency. And I mean, really, I don't even necessarily have a good starting lineup for this week. But one of the things when Anthony Richardson came back to the end of the 12th round, I think that he gives you that nice balance with Mahomes. Not that you're going to necessarily know ahead of time how to play it, but as the season moves a little bit further along, I think one of these two guys is going to end up being a massive smash at that price. But then the other problem is that neither of them are going to play this week, or we don't know yet about Anthony Richardson as we're participating in this draft. Kirk Cousins, somebody who a one-off game on a Thursday against a bad pass defense, I don't know that you're going to take that and say, everything is fine now. And yet I do think the quarterback dries up after it. And if you're going to do a single week start to make sure you don't get chopped in week 6, Kirk Cousins is the guy that I think makes sense for that. At some other positions, so one of the things that I think, again, is so important here is you need to build your depth at wide receiver and running back. I don't know that I've done that as well as I would have liked, especially because, again, that round 5 pick could have been someone else. But I think that once you get to this area of the draft, players who in a redraft league and have a lot of contingent upside, or at least some, and that's interesting, they make good stashes. In a Guillotine League where so many rosters are being turned over all the time, I don't know that those players are targets as much as they might be in a slightly different type of context. And so with that being the case, I feel fine taking extra QBs. You can always cut them again. The thing that I love so much about this is you just have so much movement in a Guillotine League, and that's fun, right? Anytime you get into leagues that are very stale, even if they're redraft leagues, even if you're competitive, but there's just nothing happening, that's not as fun a fantasy football situation in which to participate. And so, again, I love this. I've been looking forward to this all week. Doing the draft itself has been so much fun. It makes you think, I guess I wouldn't say necessarily outside the box, but anytime you can do a format that does challenge you to work through what makes the most sense in this league, I think that just makes you better at fantasy overall.
Yeah, what it's made me do, Shawn, is draft Alan Lazard. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but I need
because
to
you
start
feel like
mine.
Alan Lazard is going to have the highest red zone target share of any wide receiver in the entire NFL the rest of the way.
You've got to get the ball to Alan Lazard. That is the reason that Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback of the New York Jets. As much as we don't want it to happen, that is what is happening. So again, if it is a case that I am needing a spot start this week, I think you're starting the likes of Lazard probably over a Jalen Polk. But you have the concerns of if Neighbors is out there, if Watson is out there. So I'm going to say I'm comfortable in my own skin taking that Lazard selection, but it wasn't something I was expecting to do at this point. We are in the 13th.
Were you thinking that you would have to be comfortable in your own skin to make your pick in round 13? I
didn't know, Shawn. It gets the water's getting muddy out here pretty quickly, and that's what has happened there. I like the roster that I've put together here, but there is also lots of moving parts, including the 2 bye weeks in week 6, the injured players that have made the final parts of this construction a little bit challenging. I do agree, Shawn, with you on the quarterbacks and taking them. The other part though is like trying to maintain a roster moving forward and having to cut those players with the short benches, can be a challenge very quickly. Even with players that you're trying to stash or keep beyond the bye week, it's tricky with the short benches in this particular format.
Colm, I want you to be in this league for the long term. Taking the 2 quarterbacks at the 12-13 turn was not about blocking you. I'm actually actively nervous that you were going to get chopped in the first week.
Oh well, the part here that the real truth behind it, Shawn, is that I have commitment issues, and I'll stay in this league for 1 week, and then I have a newborn child to look after. I can't be setting the lineup every week in one more league. All that being joking aside for this one, the other player I thought about taking was Darius Slayton because he would be the player who would slot in again if Malik Neighbors wasn't there. He goes 2 picks ahead of Kevin's next selection. He did take Greg Dortch previously. Kevin, make me feel better. What bad player are you going to draft here in round 14?
I have a hankering to drink to draft Ray Davis, even though I know he hasn't really done much. So I don't know. Is that bad enough for you, Colm?
I would probably rather have Ray Davis, than Alan Lazard. So
I can move it down. There's plenty of bad wide receivers right now.
Go further down.
I say that's what I wanted to draft. More wide receivers, but it's just there's some pretty sad names going on here. So,
well, I feel better now. You said that the wide receiver names are sad, so I've taken one of those and Lazard. Your backup. Who are you taking? You taking Ray Davis?
Yeah, I took Ray Davis. I didn't feel great about drafting Dortch. Having technical difficulties here where I keep clicking on Ray Davis, but he does not. I don't think maybe the app wants me to draft Ray Davis because it won't let me. Nope. Here, let's slide down to. How about a Gabe Davis? Does that work?
As long as you get a Davis, that's okay.
Yeah, I don't know. It's literally not letting me draft anybody right now. So, let's see if it looks like I might run out of time here, and then I'll reload the app. But yeah, literally, it's not letting me draft anybody right now. So let's see. What
lucky Def. We'll see who you come away with here. Shawn, you have 3 quarterbacks. The entire rest of the league has at least 1 quarterback. It's probably time when it gets back to me here that I take a QB. Do you think?
I do. I was going to ask Kevin about Greg Dortch. He's obviously writing the fantastic wide receiver piece on RotoViz this season. In week 5, especially, we saw Michael Wilson. With getting Michael Wilson and now having Zay Jones back, having looked at all the peripherals all season, Kevin's still pretty enthusiastic about the role that Dortch has there.
I mean, it just seems like they kind of shuffle back and forth between the two receivers. So every time when especially even the waiver article, it's just trying to looking at their roles from game to game.
You are up next.
Pretty much the Dortch pick was kind of like a shot in the dark that, like, if I have to start him, maybe he's the one who corrals more of that volume per week. But I definitely don't feel great about it. I haven't really been too excited about adding anybody on the Cardinals in the Cardinals receiving core outside of obviously McBride and MHJ. So, but I mean, he has had games where he has gotten good volume. So it's more of just one of those Hail Mary picks right at the end of the draft, more so than, like, there's some secret sauce going on here.
You are on the clock.
So I do get a quarterback. I take Geno Smith. I had been looking at him for, as the target for a few rounds. So I'm happy to get him. We'll see. This will be coming out on Friday. People will already know with Thursday Night Football how that particular pick has played out as they face the 49ers. Kevin, you finish up with a roster of Jared Goff at quarterback, Chase Brown, Javonte Williams, Braylon Allen, Raheem Mostert, Ty Chandler, Ray Davis, wide receivers Marvin Harrison, Devontae Smith, Chris Olave, Khalil Shakir, Josh Downs, Greg Dortch, and Sam Laporta at tight end. All things considered, how are you feeling about that roster? Are you making it past week 6?
I hope I make it past week 6, but I don't really feel great about it, to tell you the truth. It's really awesome that the first Guillotine draft that I ever had is going to be recorded for all to see for all time on the internet. So all in all, I mean, like I said, a lot of the stuff at the beginning, I wish I would have been scrolling down a little further right at the beginning, just kind of anchoring to some of the anchored ADPs more or less. So I was anchoring to bad anchoring, I guess. And, going forward in my next one, I will definitely be scrolling down a little further and looking at more player names a little further down the line. But overall, I mean, I hope I make it to the next week. I feel like I do. I feel like I have a good starting lineup just for this week. And then hopefully, we'll just kind of see where things go from there.
Blair, you've Lamar Jackson, and then at running back, Dobbins, James Conner, Tyrone Tracy, Austin Eckler, Najee Harris. Then wide receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Zay Flowers, George Pickens, Jerry Jeudy, Alec Pierce, and then Jalen Coker. I think you have all ended up with one Colts wide receiver on your roster apiece, so it'll be interesting. That's a pivot point for each of the teams each week if you're starting those guys. How are you feeling about your team as it's settled down here now?
I'm feeling pretty good. I would have liked to be able to get a little more wide receiver depth, but I think I'm set up well for week 6 at least, and then can address the rest of the roster in later weeks.
Yeah, the other thing with this is it's PPR. You only have to start the 2 wide receivers, so you can work through that as well. Shawn, you have CeeDee Lamb, Stephon Diggs, Jalen Waddle, Adonai Mitchell, just the 4 wide receivers for you. James Cook, David Montgomery, Jonathan Brooks, Kendry Miller. So just the 2 running backs for you so far through the season. But don't worry, you have 3 quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes, Anthony Richardson, Kirk Cousins, and then you have 3 tight ends, George Kittle, Tucker Kraft, Evan Ingram. So it's not super flex, but you're well set up there. How are you feeling about your roster?
Good. I mean, this is so much fun, right? I should have taken the 4th QB and had Caleb Williams kind of blocked off there. Colm, was he? I mean, we let Caleb Williams fall to you in the 14th round, and you took someone else.
Yeah, I took Geno Smith. I think that over the course, again, week 6 is one thing. I think over the course of the season that Smith is probably still going to outscore Williams. And again, I asked the question earlier, do you think I'm crazy with the Packers thing? Do you feel that that's an outlandish thought to have? I think this Bears offense is going to still have its fair share of teething pains. They faced the Carolina Panthers, I will remind people, in week 5, who are the worst defense in the NFL. So
they're not great. I think there are some other defenses. I mean, the Washington Commanders are pretty similar, and Deshaun Watson threw for 125 yards against them. Yeah, I think it would surprise me if Geno Smith scores more points than Caleb Williams. Maybe it was a bad matchup against the Giants with all of the blitzing that they do, but he just has such a hard time getting beyond the first read, and that limits their ability to take advantage of what's such a fun receiving core, right? we've gotten some reasons to be enthusiastic about JSN, and then some reasons to think that he may, not be just a guy, but maybe not a lot more than that. Certainly, Tyler Lockett is no longer what he once was, but can make some plays. They have those running backs. The offense should just be much more dynamic. I don't think that you can afford to lose that game to the Giants. Now, one game doesn't decide a person's season, certainly doesn't decide their career, but the play calling was also disconcerting in that they had some potential weaknesses to take advantage of. I think on the Bears side, I'm still very concerned about Shane Waldron. I would like Keenan Allen to look healthier and more involved. You want Odunze to look like someone who's going to be a star as opposed to a very niche piece. You don't love the direction they've gone in with trying to emphasize DeAndre Swift, and yet the plays that he makes on a weekly basis, and you saw him fight for some rushing yards, for some first downs, potentially for some touchdowns in this game. I think he's going to score better as a rusher as things progress. Both of those guys are solid picks late. It does kind of reinforce this idea. Again, you have to wait at QB, and there are a lot of options. We haven't really had a ton of quarterback injuries to kind of go with all of these wide receiver injuries that have been so frustrating. We know we're going to get some more of those. My hope would be that Caleb Williams gives you more upside than Geno Smith. At the same time, I don't know if Geno gives you the necessary floor in a guillotine format. I don't know. The Giants game, Colm, was a real concern for me. I hope that you're right. My bold prediction for Neil's article to start the season was that a Geno Smith and or Bo Nix Superflex team was going to win the Superflex contest. Both of those guys have flashed at different points. I think you could make an argument for Bo Nix in this general range as well when you consider how he's throwing his body around and the mobility that he has. Obviously, just mostly giving you and Blair with Lamar Jackson there a hard time. You got a lot of depth because you were willing to wait at QB.
The part with Geno the one thing I'm going to mention is, and this is something I don't know if you've become aware of it yet, but every team that's playing the Detroit Lions is getting a real tough time the following week. The Lions are beating people up in their matchups, and if you remember back to 395 yards and 1 touchdown for Geno Smith against the Lions in that particular game. He did struggle this past week. We still had 284 passing yards, 1 touchdown. He did have 72 rushing yards. I think that Geno is going to be fine. He gets the 49ers this week. If we get through that, he gets the Atlanta Falcons, who aren't great on defense, and will have some quarterbacks to pick up beyond that point. But let's hear my team. I went in and set the line up here just to see how many questionable tags, Shawn, and things come up. I have currently got 3 Q tags, 2 bye players, 1 doubtful tag. So there may be issues, but we have a lineup nonetheless. So at quarterback, Geno Smith. We have Brock Bowers at tight end. Running backs, Bucky Irving, Joe Mixon, Jalen Warren, Devin Singletary, Jalen Wright. Lots of wide receivers, Malik Neighbors, Deebo Samuel, Jameson Williams, Xavier Worthy, Christian Watson, Jalen Polk, Alan Lazard. I just need to get through week 6, and then this team is set up for success. I would imagine if we go in and check, I am and the favorite standing to go out. I actually have just checked it. I'm not. I'm actually set at the moment to be the second highest scorer this week, but maybe other people have to shuffle around by
you weeks. And I have set our lineups, which gives us an advantage.
Shawn, don't tell people those sort of things. But yeah, I remember having a similar conversation after the first draft where Shawn wasn't optimistic on my long-term outlook, but we're still going, and I still have questionable running back play. But that was a lot of fun, guys, to run through that guillotine draft. And again, as we mentioned, we did the other one. You can set these up for any point of the season, and you kind of draft for the amount of teams that the amount of weeks are left in the season. Hence, we've done a 13-team one here. We may even do another one at some point later in the season. But I want to thank Blair and Kevin for jumping on for this one. Obviously, it's always fun drafting with them, drafting with Shawn, drafting with the OT listeners who put us through our paces in this particular draft. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime, and my co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out all of Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com, as you can do with Blair and Kevin as well. Good luck in NFL Week 6, and until we are back, have a good one.